Thank you for being here this morning. I'm excited to get the opportunity to chat with you a little bit about who I am and what I do. So my name is Rachel Freeman. I'm the Director of Integrated Marketing for Digital at a company called Centrify Corporation. Centrify we're in the cybersecurity space, so we protect users against the risk from having too many passwords and IT admin users from having too much privilege, basically mitigating against cyber attacks and data breaches. So it's a pretty exciting space to be in right now, especially with all that's going on in the political atmosphere and just in reading the news, hacks are happening every single day. So it's an interesting space to be in. Personally, I've spent the past 10 years in search. I've spent about 8 years on the agency side, and about 3 years ago, I decided to make the switch from agency to in-house to kind of better understand, to basically become the client and understand those challenges at a deeper level and see if I can, roll my sleeves up and get into the weeds. Just to go ahead and jump into it, on average, B2B influencers do about 12 searches prior to visiting a specific brand site. So I think that this is a really important statistic to keep in mind, because as SEOs, as content marketers, it's really, I think, common and understandable to start really focusing on your own domain, your rankings, your traffic, but which is important, definitely. But remembering that our prospects, our new potential customers, are doing a lot of searches, they're doing a lot of research before they end up coming to your site. So they're not going to click on your website until they most likely kind of have an understanding of who you are. Our customers are smart. They know that by the time they click on a brand website that they're going to be sold to. So they're really not going to click until they're ready to do that, and they're kind of in that stage. So it's important to keep in mind that the search landscape, it's also important of, where, and that's where PR comes in essentially, is where else are you being found to help sort of establish that trust factor with your prospects so that they will be more inclined to visit your site when they're ready. So again, your website really isn't the most important ranking in the search and competitive landscape. You want to think about what types of content are showing up for relevant searches, and are you mentioned within that content so that you're getting in front of your audience at the beginning of the buying cycle. Too often we hear about, especially in the B2B space, where the buying cycle is really, really long. Potentially your brand coming into buyers might not hear about you or might not know your full capabilities until they're 3 months in, 6 months into the research process, and they're almost like too far deep to kind of go back and reevaluate a vendor. So that's super critical. Coming from an in-house perspective, I oversee paid search. I dabble a little bit in SEO, but I'm certainly not on the PR side. And coming into it, when I started thinking about SEO for Centrify and what that meant for us, our primary competitor is Okta. Many of you have probably heard of them, and they're pretty much a PR juggernaut. So going into it, I thought, okay, we're up against quite a bit here. They are a unicorn company with $1 billion valuation. They have, a really pretty website, and they get a lot of really good media coverage. So knowing that going into it, I sort of thought, okay, we're probably getting creamed with our rankings. How are we going to compete against them? Like, what is our positioning here? Even though our product is fantastic, and we have a lot of third-party analysts that validate that. Recently, Gartner came out and said that within the categories that we compete directly against Okta, we ranked above them in every single category. So we know that we're going into it. We have a really solid product, but our primary competitor has that brand awareness that we just don't. The other main challenge that I face going into it on the in-house side of things is just the organizational silos. So again, I kind of oversee a lot of different areas within digital, and they're essentially all different teams. I'm working on the demand gen team. I'm working with social and PR. I'm working with our website teams on the technical optimization. So really trying to figure out how to bridge those gaps and coming up with solutions that are going to help us, improve our end goals, and for me, increase our traffic and engagement, and generate qualified leads at the end of the day. Really working with all those teams and pulling them together effectively to leverage all the great things that we're doing. With those silos, a lot of our initiatives just sometimes aren't lined up as well as they could be. The demand gen team might have a campaign that's happening over here, and the PR team might be talking about a different topic. So making sure that we're just in alignment with everything timing-wise, and that the folks that could potentially come in and say, hey, have you thought about doing this, when we can still make that change, that we're able to exert control over that, as opposed to going in after the fact and saying, hey, why don't you loop me in on that? We could have done this. So really helping to bridge that gap. So coming up with a solution, it's important when you're starting out with SEO too. I know that the perception can be that it's just another thing that people have to do. It's this extra step, and it takes all this new work, and everyone's constantly up against a ton of deadlines, trying to figure out a way to build into the process so it isn't or doesn't feel like that extra step. And if it does feel like that extra step, that those wins will actually pay off. The way that I started this, I've only been at Centrify for a year, started digging into SEO, not quite 6 months ago, maybe 6 to 8 months ago, but trying to figure out, okay, what are the quick wins that we can see? For us, it was our blog, for sure. I think it's very common for companies to be pretty product-centric and their voice on their blog, and to be, pushing their own products, their own solutions, and not necessarily talking about the pain points of the customers. And naturally, the pain points of our customers are how people are searching. So following up on that alignment there. So really, in terms of process, for me, focusing on the blog as our low-hanging fruit, it's not even rocket science. A lot of it is just, making sure that our SEO research is effectively integrated into our editorial calendar, that our blogging team, knows what topics to write about, and how to write about them. So, education and training is a big part of that process. But also saying, hey, we actually need to be writing this percentage of our content should be focused around pain point type content. This percentage can be PR, news heavy or product centric, and this percentage could be, maybe focused on some rapid response type blog posts when we're responding to stuff that's happening in the news with maybe the latest data breach, for example. And when our bloggers are talking about that evergreen content that's really going to help with SEO, what exactly are they going to be talking about? Making sure that that's in alignment with our corporate initiatives, that it's going to drive search traffic for us, and that it's not, them writing about whatever their recent pet project is. Reviewing outgoing content for optimization opportunities, again, pretty much a no-brainer, but I think the key is if you're going off of that foundation where they already know what to write about in the beginning, it makes your job a lot easier. I cannot tell you, and I'm sure many of you feel this as well, how many times you've gotten asked to review a piece of content to SEO it. And you're like, sorry, I don't know what to do with this. It's, you try to even change the title and everything's locked in. So, and I think that goes back to the education process. This role is really strategic, but it's strategic if you're in the trenches and in the process at the very beginning, being able to exert some control over the type of content that you get to put out, because ultimately that's going to impact our performance, as opposed to, churning out content, and then no one's really going back at the end of the day and saying, what did that do for us? And I think, it's easy to say, these are best practices, but the challenges of being in-house is how do you change your day-to-day processes to make that a reality? And then, reviewing content for optimization opportunities. By the time that gets to you, you pretty much already know. You pretty much already know what the theme is. Maybe it's making some slight tweaks. It's really not like this arduous process or something where you're like, this isn't going to do anything for us, maybe next time. And then, providing some strategic input surrounding promising PR themes. For us, we have a PR team, but we also work with a PR agency. They don't necessarily know search. They aren't necessarily in Google Analytics every day, like I am. So making sure that we have that effective communication of saying hey, we're seeing this on our end. Is there a spin here? Is there an angle? Is there a publication that is looking for someone to talk about this topic right now? Because this is getting a lot of traction for us. So again, part of that solution is really communication. I'm not on the PR team, but I'm in on those weekly PR calls. Half the time, I'm a mouse on the other end of the phone, not really saying anything, just listening. But a lot of times, something will come up and say oh, I actually saw, a lot of traffic coming from that. I think there's some leverage here. We should do X, Y, and Z. Or I saw this mentioned in the press. Was there an opportunity for us to actually link back to this page? Just being able to be in there and be involved and connect those dots really has, in aggregate, quite a bit of impact if you're doing that on a regular basis. Using data to tell the whole story. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, Okta is really a juggernaut from a PR perspective. They're the ones that get so many mentions, so much coverage. But when you actually go in and look at the data from an SEO perspective, I found, with the right tools and the right analysis, that actually, on the search front, they weren't as strong as we were, or some of our other competitors were. So maybe we should be looking at some of our other competitors a little bit more closely from a search perspective, and maybe we should also be communicating that to our board, to show them, hey, actually, maybe they're getting all the mentions, but we know how to drive the bottom line. Search is, one of our greatest revenue and lead generators. It has the greatest ROI for us. So we really know how to impact the bottom line. And our team has a nose to the grindstone, and that's what the board wants to hear, is we know what we're doing. We know how to make an impact, and as a company, we're actually already fully customer funded. So I think that is just another example of why that is. And then reporting wins for team motivation. Again, I think that's kind of a no-brainer, but just remembering that, for me in my position, one of my biggest roles is to be a champion for PR. I want to make them look great. I want to make sure that we're maximizing all the awesome stuff that we're doing. And that's translating back to increased traffic from their efforts. One thing that I had noticed when I first started at Centrify is we had a lot of great coverage, but it wasn't translating back into traffic to our site. So we're getting a lot of mentions, not necessarily as many links. What can we do about that? I wanted to give an example with one of the bigger PR campaigns that we had this year surrounding a topic on CEO fraud. So that's just a type of phishing or a type of scam that's pretty common, where in our case, our VP of Finance, it looked like our VP of Finance got an email from our CEO saying, hey, you need to approve this wire transfer of $600,000, instructions attached, blah, blah, blah. He gets this email and is like, wait a second, this is kind of a red flag, what's going on? Examines it, figures out there's one tiny typo in the email address, and that it's actually a scam. That could have been huge for us, being a security company. Finding that out, but that's a great story. I mean, that's the big part of our marketing. Anybody's marketing is great storytelling. And so our CEO wrote a blog post about it. I'm seeing it's getting a lot of initial traction. We kind of know naturally that's a great story for PR. But being able to communicate that back to the PR team and saying, hey, this actually has a ton of search volume, 3 times as much than our traditional targeted keywords when you look at the data. We need to maximize this in every way possible. And I need to be involved in, when you're getting these placements from coverage, how are we linking back strategically? How are we optimizing that content so that that blog post is something that continues to drive traffic for us? And also even running some paid amplification to boost the visibility of that story through some native advertising. So just in working with our PR team and being able to have some say in how those stories are getting placed and how they're linking back to us. We got a ton of great coverage. Jumping into another example, kind of going back to the blog topic, for me, knowing that was low-hanging fruit, thinking about getting traffic from the long tail, again, exerting some control over, in the beginning of the process, before people are writing these blog posts, identifying these are the things I need you to write about to help us get on the radar for, in this case, a particular campaign around multi-factor authentication, which we weren't anywhere on the radar for prior to January, but that's a huge initiative for us right now. So being able to say up front, here's what we need to write about. The blog is a quick and easy way to take advantage of that. Let's just be thinking about that from the beginning. We have a lot of bloggers. And even though, I think that sounds, again, pretty straightforward, not rocket science, having that say from the beginning is what helped us see that success. Again, we really just weren't on the radar when you look even back further to January, but historically looking, in the past 6 to 7 months, our rankings for those targeted keywords have improved significantly. We've certainly added to the list of keywords that we're tracking and targeting as we've seen successes. And it's not just long tail. So we started with the long tail, knowing that that's low-hanging fruit and wanting to rank for these types of keywords and knowing that people are going to come in those ways. But we're also on page 1 for multi-factor authentication now, which previously we're on page 5, which is totally off the radar. And that translates into traffic. So we've seen a really nice steady increases in traffic to our MFA-related content, direct correlations to our ranking improvements. So that's been a pretty big success for us. And then going back to the CEO fraud traffic example, again, that was something that I just noticed with, all the search volume surrounding that. It's a great story, obviously a natural fit for PR, but how do we leverage that over time and take advantage of that traffic? And as we're getting these new mentions and new stories and getting strategic links, we actually saw the peak of our traffic, several months after our initial story was posted. So we continue to see the fruits of that labor come from just that one story. So practical takeaways, again, establishing consistent communication in whatever formats work for your team internally, trying to break through those silos and make sure that you kind of know what everyone's doing, what everyone's working on, and provide those insights since you have access to all this data that, as marketers, as SEO folks that are constantly in the data, I know I sometimes kind of take it for granted, and then you start talking to people and it's just blowing people's minds. So remembering that information is actually still a gold mine, and communicating that out, communicating the wins, building your keyword research and long tail strategy into an editorial calendar if you're focusing on something like your blog, and reviewing content when still in draft form and subject to change, really inserting yourself at the beginning of the process so that you can make the effective change that you know that you need to see results. And that's it.